Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Call of Juarez Gunslinger for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is a first-person shooter and the fourth game in the Call of Juarez series. It was released in May of 2013 and at a budget price of $15 US. And it's certainly a return to what we generally expect from Call of Juarez after what happened with the third game, where it went to modern-day Mexico instead of the Wild West setting that we definitely expect from Call of Juarez. They're back to Wild West here, and at that budget price, it raises some questions. Is this a fully featured game? Is it something worthy of continuing the Call of Juarez series? Is it an improvement over the previous games, despite being at that budget price, or does it feel like a budget game? Well, let's find out. Well, as far as the presentation goes, it certainly has that budget feel in the graphics department, where a lot of the things just look odd. They don't necessarily look bad, they just look odd. Part of that is just the visual style they've gone for, which is this drawn look, where everything has this heavy, dark outline, and there's a lot of vibrant colors to emphasize certain things and things like that. And so it's a refreshing change from the brown and gray and realistic that plagued the previous three games. But at the same time, there's a lot of fairly low-res textures. The modeling, while generally pretty good, isn't taken advantage of in the animation department, where things just look silly in a lot of spots. For instance, reloading the Winchester rifle, and just the Winchester rifle in general, where when you're firing the thing, it doesn't actually cycle the action, it just moves the lever, where you're reloading it and you're inserting cartridges into the solid steel bottom of the receiver as opposed to the loading gate on the side of the rifle. Doesn't make any sense. And things like that sort of plague the animation department, where it just looks weird and nonsensical. But everything else looks generally fine. And that stylized graphic really does help it out, particularly when you get to the actual gunfighting, where you're getting a lot of sort of slow-mo blood spurts and everything when you get those enemies killed and everything. They'll sort of move in slow-mo while everything else is still moving normally, but they'll sort of move in slow-mo while you get this cool-looking shot of them getting hit and stuff like that. But other than that, the sound design is okay. The voice acting is generally pretty good, particularly with the protagonist, who really does sound like he's trying to truss up all of his stories and really trying to come across as this storyteller as opposed to just some guy recounting something. And the characters themselves generally have pretty decent voice acting. It's pretty much what you'd expect from a Western, and so it can be kind of cheesy, but other than that, it's pretty solid. The sound effects are generally pretty solid as well, although I did think that some of the gunfire sounds a bit underpowered. It could have been pumped up a bit with some bass or something like that. And instead, we just get some okay weapon sounds. Then there's the music. Some of it is recycled from the previous Call of Juarez games, but it's pretty solid. It does fit the Western theme well, and they've done a good job of using it where it's supposed to be used, basically. You really do get that great Western vibe from the music, even though it's not particularly great music. It's just solid enough that it really does help get you into that Western vibe. But obviously what really matter are the story and the gameplay, and the story is actually one of the most interesting parts of this game. Not because it's a really, really solid plot with a lot of intricacy or anything like that, but because of the way it's told. You play as Silas Greaves. He is a bounty hunter, and he's retelling his stories in 1910 in this saloon in Kansas. And he's just telling his stories about how he took down various outlaws and all that along his path to get basically revenge for some guys who killed his brothers. And while the plot itself obviously isn't particularly complex or anything like that, again, it's the way it's told that's interesting, because he's telling these stories and the audience is actually interacting with him while he's doing this. And so they will question the validity of his statements, or they'll interject with, no, I thought it went like this, and then he corrects them and goes, no, 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 it went like this. And so it's this very interesting back and forth that actually does end up affecting the gameplay to some degree, just because of how it changes the plot when you're going through it. But that method of storytelling that feels very fluid, like an actual story being told to you and you're actually interacting with it, it's just cool. And that way of doing the story made it go from just being a serviceable plot to something that actually ends up being surprisingly compelling. Now, the gameplay is pretty much what you would expect from Call of Juarez at this point, but with some differences. Now, they've split it into 3 different modes. The first of them is, of course, a story mode, where you're just going through the story as Silas Greaves, as he tells the story and gets interjected upon and all that sort of thing. The second is the arcade mode, which is just a score attack mode where you're fighting off hordes of enemies and you just go through the level and eventually you manage to get through it. And then the last is duel mode, where you just go into duels against various characters in the game. Now, the story mode is pretty much what you would expect from a first-person shooter these days. It's pretty linear for the most part. There are some collectibles here and there that you can pick up called Nuggets of Truth. And basically these are factual evidence of things that actually are gone over in the plot to this game. But it's just actual historical facts about those things. For instance, Butch Cassidy or Billy the Kid or something like that. So you have these bits thrown throughout the game, and they're actually pretty interesting to read, because the Wild West is just an interesting time, obviously. Well, time and place. But the gameplay is just straight-up first-person shooter gameplay that you would pretty much expect, but the difference is that they've thrown in points into the single-player, as well as leveling up. Now, the level-ups are handled with the point system. You get points for getting combos as well as getting special kills or things like that, like headshots or piercing shots where you shot through some cover to get to the enemy, or different ways that you dispatch your enemies. You'll get more and more points. Now these points go into your level up. Now when you level up, you can select an ability, which is a passive ability, or it might be that you get to a certain point and you'll get an upgraded version of a weapon that you've been carrying. For instance, the engraved Ranger pistol, which the Ranger is basically the hand cannon of the game, and the engraved Ranger is just a fancy version of it. Things like that. Now, this level up system actually works pretty well in this game, because there's no point in it where you feel like you don't have the skills to get where you need. It's just something that makes it more fun, so to speak. Like faster reload times, or longer time in concentration mode, where it goes into slow-mo and enemies are highlighted in red and things like that. Or just various passive abilities, more ammo that you're carrying. Any number of things like that that enhance your game without making it, this is required for gameplay. In fact, I pretty much ignored one of the skill trees altogether, just because I didn't go for that playstyle, which was the close quarters playstyle. I went with basically a gunslinger with the dual weapons and then, of course, rifles. But the close quarters thing goes with shotguns. And while you're playing the game, occasionally the interjections to Silas's retelling and things like that will actually cause it to either rewind or go into an alternate telling of the story just abruptly, and then you get to play through a different way of doing that particular area. It's pretty cool, and it makes the game feel fresh and exciting, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get with this thing. It could be something completely ridiculous. Now, as far as the story mode, there were only a couple of things that I didn't like. The first of them was the boss fights. Generally, they weren't that great. They're serviceable, but they're just uninspired. It's just kind of things you've seen before, and admittedly, first-person shooter boss fights have never been particularly great. Let's face it here. The second thing was the dueling, and this extends into duel mode. I'll have a couple of clips of dueling for you, where you have to maintain focus with the crosshair, which just waves around, and you have to try to center it with the mouse on the enemy, and it zooms in more and more and more as you focus. And you also have to use the A and D keys to get your hand into the appropriate position to draw quickly. And there are two ways of winning the duel. You can either do it honorably, where the opponent draws first, and then you still manage to take them out, or you can do it dishonorably, where you draw first. And the later you get in the game, the harder it gets to actually do the honorable way of doing things. Now, in duel mode, it gets really hard to do that later on. But in the single player, just straight up campaign mode, it's pretty much expected that you can do it. And I didn't really have all that many problems with it once I figured out that once you get to a certain point in the game, you can actually dodge bullets when you're doing the duels. This is another thing that's kind of cool about the game. As you're playing, if you are down to your last bit of health and somebody shoots at you, it'll go into slow-mo. And the bullet will come at you, and it will go a certain direction. You can dodge the bullet by leaning one direction or another. It's actually really cool that they threw that in there. It gives you this nice bit of, well, you're not quite out of the fight yet. Get to cover, heal up, and you're back in the fight. And it's just a cool way of doing things to where it still comes across as this cool storytelling kind of thing, and all this stylized action going on, without seeming really, really gimmicky. And so, this extends into the dueling as well, where you're having to dodge bullets because the guys are just too fast, or there's multiple guys that you're dueling. So, it gets interesting. And when you get to the later parts of the game is really the only parts where I really had any trouble with the duels. And the duel mode itself, I also had trouble doing the duels. The rest of the game, generally not too big of a deal. So, that leaves arcade mode and duel mode. Now, I've pretty much gone over duel mode already. It's basically just the duels from the game, only it's in a scored mode where you're competing against your friends, basically, on the Steam leaderboards. That's pretty much it. There's nothing really to say about it. It's not all that interesting. I didn't particularly care for it, but oh well. The arcade mode, on the other hand, is basically a mode where you're just running around trying to get as high of a score as possible, just going through these levels and taking out enemies as fast as you can with as high combos as you can, and you get the selection of one of the 3 skill trees. Of course, you have the Gunslinger, the Ranger, and I think it's called the Marksman, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Or maybe I'm mixing things up. But the idea is that one of them uses precision instruments, one of them is the 2-gun-wielding Gunslinger, and then one of them is the close-range guy. It's pretty straightforward. And as you play through this mode, you'll be able to level up that skill tree and get access to the better skills and such as well. It's a fun mode, and it really does fit in with the rather arcadey style they've gone for with this game. So it's nice that they threw that in there. And even as a bonus, once you beat the story mode itself, you get access to New Game Plus, where you get to keep all of your upgrades and then play through the game again. So there is replay value here, apart from just having the campaign. There's more to it than just a fairly short campaign, with some surprisingly satisfying gunplay where you're getting all those really cool stylized sequences where you're just blasting enemies left, right, and center, and occasionally you'll get this quick time event, but it's nothing too serious. It doesn't instantly fail you usually. You get all that cool storytelling, and then you have these other arcadey modes to go around and compete with your friends on. So all in all, Gunslinger is a surprisingly fun package, considering I didn't particularly enjoy the previous Call of Juarez games that I've actually played. On the other hand, Gunslinger feels like a Western, and on top of that, the first-person shooter mechanics just feel right. where all the weapons feel pretty powerful for the most part, where the arcadey mechanics with the cool stylized action going on really does make you feel like a total badass. The only things I really didn't like were the duels and the boss fights. And to be honest with you, that's not all that much in the game. There actually aren't all that many boss fights, and there actually aren't all that many duels. And they're spaced out evenly, so you never really feel like it's going to wear on you too much. So in the long run, Gunslinger is a highly enjoyable game, and I do recommend it. I give it a 4 out of 5. Thanks for watching.